She was a church-going housewife and mother who hacked her best friend to death with 41 axe blows and got away with it. The contradiction is shocking, yet in 1980 Texas, it became a grim reality. This is the true story of Candy Montgomery, a woman with a perfect suburban life on the surface and a bloody secret underneath. Wylie, Texas, was a tranquil suburb in 1980, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and doors were left unlocked. Fewer than 4,000 people lived there, and its community centered around church picnics, potlucks, and Sunday services. Candy Montgomery fit right in. By all accounts, Candy was a friendly, church-going mom who sang in the choir and taught Sunday school. She had moved to Wylie with her husband Pat and their 2 kids, eager for a quiet life. Neighbors saw her as kind, outgoing, and deeply religious, hardly someone you'd cast as a villain in a horror film. Yet, 1980 would prove anything but peaceful. That summer was brutally hot, and a different kind of heat was simmering beneath Wylie's wholesome surface. Candy's smile hid restlessness. She described herself as bored crazy as a housewife. The Montgomerys had befriended church newcomers Betty and Gore, becoming fast friends over choir practice and Bible study. No one in the pews on Sunday could have guessed the dangerous temptations and secrets brewing among these friends. Candy and Betty were best friends. Their daughters played together, and their families often sat side by side at church. But behind the friendly smiles, Candy grew infatuated with Betty's husband, Gore. In 1978, a spark ignited one night after a church volleyball game. What started as innocent banter turned into lingering glances and accidental touches. Candy and Alan's flirtations soon crossed the line. By December 1978, they began a full-blown affair. They met in secret every couple of weeks, coordinating around church events and school schedules. For months, no one suspected a thing. By late 1979, racked with guilt, Candy and Alan agreed to end the affair before anyone got hurt. Alan returned to being a devoted husband to Betty, who had just given birth to their second child. Candy refocused on her family and faith. On the surface, life went back to normal. But secrets have a way of coming out. Betty Gore, a quiet middle school teacher and new mother, started sensing something was off. Her friendship with Candy remained cordial, but tension lurked underneath. Perhaps it was a fleeting look in Candy's eyes or a half-heard whisper at a church social. Betty had begun to suspect the affair. Still, nothing could prepare this devout, small-town housewife for the violence that was about to erupt in her own home. June 13, 1980, a date that would sear itself into Wylie's memory. It was Friday the 13th, a day already infamous in superstition and slasher films, and the Texas sun blistered the town at 90-plus degrees. That morning, Candy was busy volunteering at the local church's vacation Bible school, guiding children through cheerful songs and Bible verses. In the middle of the wholesome chaos, Candy remembered a favor she'd promised Betty. Betty's older daughter, 5-year-old Elisa, had spent the night at Candy's house for a sleepover. The kids were planning to go swimming after VBS, but Elisa's swimsuit was still at home. Ever the helpful friend, Candy offered to swing by the Gore house to pick it up. By late morning, Candy pulled up to Betty's home, a typical ranch-style house on a quiet cul-de-sac. The neighborhood was still, cicadas buzzing in the heat. Candy walked up to the door, rehearsing a casual greeting. "Stay calm, act normal," she told herself. After all, she and Betty had seen each other just the night before at choir practice. Everything seemed fine. Candy's heart pounded unexpectedly as she knocked on the door. Was it the leftover adrenaline from rushing around all morning, or a deeper dread? She couldn't know that behind that door lay a confrontation months in the making. Betty answered the door, holding her infant daughter in her arms. She managed a polite smile and invited Candy inside. The air conditioning was on full blast, offering relief from the heat, but Candy felt a different chill as she stepped in. Silence hung for a moment between the two women in the modest kitchen. "I came to grab Elisa's swimsuit," Candy said, forcing a grin. Betty nodded, her expression strained. Something's wrong, Candy thought. Betty placed the baby in her crib and then, instead of fetching the swimsuit immediately, turned to Candy with an intense look. "Candy, I have to ask you something," Betty said quietly, her voice trembling. Candy's stomach dropped. "This is it. Are you having an affair with Alan?" Betty's blunt question sliced through the polite facade. Candy froze. In that instant, dozens of emotions flashed across both women's faces. Fear, betrayal, anger. Candy had promised herself she'd never have to have this conversation. "Betty," she whispered, "it was a mistake. It's over. It was over long ago." Candy's admission hung in the air. Betty's eyes welled with tears, then narrowed with fury. Months of suspicion and anguish now confirmed, Betty felt a surge of rage. Without a word, Betty abruptly turned and walked toward the utility room off the kitchen. Candy stood in the hallway, heart pounding, as Betty reemerged gripping a 3-foot-long axe. The same axe that the Gore family kept to chop firewood was now in Betty's hands, and she wasn't holding it for chores. "You stay away from my husband," Betty hissed, voice low and shaking. Candy's mouth went dry. She took a step back instinctively. "Betty, please. I'm so sorry." For a moment, Betty only glared, the axe between them like a loaded weapon. Then, breathing hard, Betty seemed to master herself. She lowered the axe. A long, terrible silence. Finally, Betty spoke almost in a whisper. "I have to get Elise's things." She set the axe down by the door and turned her back to Candy to gather the swimsuit and a towel. Candy exhaled, thinking the worst was over. "If I just take the swimsuit and leave," she thought, "we can forget this happened." Candy stepped forward softly. Betty was rummaging in a closet. The door out was just a few feet beyond Betty. Candy decided to tiptoe past. As she inched by, she placed a gentle hand on Betty's shoulder. "I really am sorry, Betty," she said, voice trembling with remorse. That touch was the spark. Betty whirled around without warning, eyes blazing. She lunged, shoving Candy backwards into the cramped utility room. Candy stumbled, panic surging. Betty's hands found the axe again. Before Candy could scream, Betty swung it in a wide arc wish. The blade whooshed mere inches from Candy's face and smashed into the doorframe. Splinters flew. Candy shrieked, raising her arms. Betty yanked the axe back and swung again wildly. This time the blade grazed Candy's head and struck her on the toe. Candy howled in pain as blood seeped into her sandal. In the tiny utility room, the two women now fought life or death over the axe. "Betty, don't do this," Candy cried, grappling Betty's wrists. "Please let me go. I don't want Alan. I don't want him," she pleaded. But Betty, eyes full of rage and heartbreak, said nothing. She was stronger than her petite frame suggested, fueled by righteous anger. The women slammed into shelves of laundry supplies, knocking over a box of Tide. Candy's back hit the washing machine with a thud. Betty raised the axe again, aiming for Candy's head. In sheer terror, Candy threw up her arms and somehow caught the axe handle. For one frozen heartbeat, they stood locked together, both holding the weapon, sweat and tears mixing with Betty's fury. "Shh!" Betty suddenly hissed, her finger to her lips, as if to hush Candy's screaming. That single sound, SHH, sliced through Candy's mind like lightning. In Candy's memory, it wasn't Betty in front of her, but a flashback of her own mother silencing her cries as a child, a buried trauma Candy would later reveal. Something snapped deep inside Candy Montgomery. Candy wrenched the axe free with a surge of adrenaline. A wild, high-pitched scream tore from her throat. Before she even realized it, Candy swung the axe and struck Betty. Once. Twice. Betty shrieked and fell back, but Candy kept swinging. All of Candy's fear, guilt, and panic transformed into a red haze of violence. She brought the blade down over and over, hacking relentlessly as blood splattered the walls and linoleum floor. Betty tried to raise her arms, tried to crawl away, but Candy was beyond reason. By the time it was over, Betty Gore lay motionless in a lake of blood. The small utility room was a scene of nightmare, bright red blood everywhere. Even the right side of Betty's face was unrecognizable. Candy stood over her friend's lifeless body, chest heaving. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the air. In her ears rang an eerie silence after the frenzy. She dropped the sticky axe, which clanged on the bloody floor. "Oh, God, oh no, what have I done?" Candy whispered, shaking. She was covered in Betty's blood, from her hands to her clothes. The reality of her actions crashed down. She had killed her best friend. Most people might collapse in horror at this point. Candy nearly did. But survival mode kicked in. She had to hide what happened, or her life was over. In a daze, Candy stumbled to the bathroom. She peeled off her blood-soaked blouse and took a shower right there in Betty's house, rinsing Betty's blood off her skin while the baby cried upstairs. She scrubbed her arms, her hair, watching pinkish water swirl down the drain. Her hands trembled as she tried to wipe away every crimson streak. On the floor lay her sandals, slick with blood. Candy decided to destroy the evidence, later cutting the sandals into pieces and throwing them in the trash. Dressing in fresh clothes she found in her car, Candy caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. A trickle of blood from a cut on her forehead reminded her this was real. She knew she couldn't linger. Candy crept back to the utility room, trying not to look at Betty's butchered body. The baby's wails echoed through the house, but Candy left the infant behind, alone and crying in her crib. She couldn't deal with a child now. She had to get out. Picking up the bag with Elise's swimsuit, the cruel irony of that errand, Candy stepped around Betty's body and left the house, locking the door behind her. Outside, the sky was bright and blue. Candy squinted in the sunlight, blood pounding in her ears. She climbed into her station wagon and sat gripping the wheel, heart racing. Think, Candy, think. She had to act normal. No one could know she'd been here. With a deep breath, Candy drove off to finish the day as if nothing was amiss. Incredibly, Candy returned to the church that afternoon to finish the vacation Bible school activities, putting on a smile for the kids as if she hadn't just committed a gruesome murder. Parents saw her laughing with children, leading a Bible song with perfectly steady hands. Nobody noticed the small bandage on her toe covering the cut from the axe, or the faint bruise on her forehead. Candy even joined friends for a leisurely lunch after VBS, gossiping and giggling over sandwiches. Inside, she was in turmoil. Every siren in the distance made her flinch, but Candy Montgomery was giving the performance of her life. If anyone asked about Betty that day, Candy casually replied that she'd seen her briefly in the morning, and everything was fine. It was a chilling charade, but Candy pulled it off. By evening, she was back at home, tucking her kids into bed, desperately hoping Betty's house would remain silent forever. But Betty's house did not stay silent. That very evening, Betty's husband Alan was trying to call home from a business trip in Minnesota. He had been calling repeatedly with no answer, growing more anxious each hour. By nightfall on June 13th, Alan's worry burst into panic. He reached out to neighbors. "Please check on Betty." So around 11 p.m., two concerned neighbors and a friend cautiously approached the dark Gore house. They knocked, no answer. Something was wrong. Gathering their courage, the men broke the door open and stepped inside. At first, everything seemed still. Then they heard it, a faint, mournful cry of a baby from a back room. The men followed the sound through the house, hearts pounding in their throats. They passed through the kitchen toward the utility room, and one neighbor suddenly yelled, "Oh Lord, don't come in here." The scene stopped them cold. Blood was everywhere. Thick, dark red pools on the linoleum floor, spattered up the walls, and even on the ceiling. The metallic smell hit them as they found Betty Gore's body sprawled on the floor, almost unrecognizable. One neighbor retched at the sight. Betty's face was so badly mutilated that it looked like half of it was gone. Nearby, the men saw the gruesome instrument of death, the Gore's axe, smeared with gore and abandoned a few feet away. The tough-looking neighbor felt his stomach churn. Under flickering fluorescent light, the utility room could have been a set from a horror movie. In shock, one man stammered, "She's been shot, she must have been shot. There's so much blood." The wounds were so brutal that the first thought was a gun or something beyond an ordinary struggle. But the truth was even more horrifying. It was personal, up-close carnage inflicted by hand. They quickly scooped up baby Bethany from her crib. The poor infant had been alone for perhaps 13 hours, dehydrated and scared but mercifully unharmed. As word got out, neighbors began clustering on the lawn in their nightclothes, faces pale in the glow of porch lights. Some prayed, others wept or held each other. A quiet Texas suburb had suddenly become the site of a nightmare. Soon the street was lit with the red and blue flash of police lights cutting through the warm night air. Police officers and paramedics swarmed the house, struggling to process the savagery inside. An officer emerged and shook his head, telling colleagues, "This wasn't a shooting, it's an axe." The media caught wind of the gruesome crime almost immediately. Local TV reporters descended on Wylie, breathlessly reporting an axe murder in Suburbia that seemed ripped from a horror film. In fact, the crime was so macabre that investigators themselves mused whether it was a copycat inspired by The Shining. Stephen King's axe-wielding horror story had hit theaters just 3 weeks earlier. Was there a psychopath loose in their small town? Fear spread quickly. Families double-locked their doors, and rumors ran wild. A satanic cult? A random drifter? None of it made sense. An axe murder by someone they likely knew was unthinkable. As police toiled into the night gathering evidence, one crucial clue emerged: a bloody fingerprint smudged on the freezer door. It didn't match Betty or Alan. Investigators realized they might have more than just a random madman on the loose. This looked like the work of someone close to Betty, someone who had been inside the house that day. Meanwhile, in the chaos of sirens and whispers, Alan Gore was called with the devastating news. Over the phone, a neighbor told him haltingly that Betty was dead, viciously attacked by an unknown intruder. Alan was crushed by guilt for not being there, and then he remembered. Candy. Candy Montgomery had been the last person to see Betty that morning. Alan dialed Candy's number immediately, even as midnight approached. At Candy's house, the phone rang. Candy, who had been sitting rigid on her couch, sprang up with a jolt. She'd been dreading this moment all day. With trembling hands, Candy answered. "Hello." On the other end of the line, Alan's voice was trembling and hollow. "Candy, they found Betty." Candy's blood ran cold despite the heat. She's gone, Candy. She was attacked with an axe." For a second, Candy couldn't breathe. This was it. "Stay calm." Candy forced herself to respond. "Oh my God. No," she screamed into the phone, feigning shock. Her cry was so loud, Alan had to pull the receiver away. Candy's husband, Pat, startled from the next room, watched as Candy collapsed to her knees, the phone clutched to her ear. "Not Betty, oh God, not Betty," she wailed. On the phone, Alan wept, apologizing for having to tell her this way. Candy's screams were loud enough that nearby friends would later recall hearing her sobbing through the walls. But was Candy's reaction genuine grief or the panic of a guilty soul? In that agonizing moment, Candy Montgomery's reaction was shockingly intense, almost too intense. As she howled and cried, those around her struggled to tell if it was simply the understandable sorrow of a best friend or something darker, an act of self-preservation. Candy had to make everyone believe she was just a devastated friend, not a murderer hiding in plain sight. And for a time, everyone did believe. In the days immediately following the murder, Candy comforted Alan, cried with their church friends, and attended Betty's funeral with red-rimmed eyes. Publicly, she was the picture of heartbreak. Privately, Candy was battling waves of terror. How long could she fool everyone? Had she left any clues behind? As investigators closed in on the truth, Candy's world teetered on the edge. Her best friend was dead by her hand, and no one knew, yet. The stage was set for a trial that would stun Texas and pose a chilling question. Could a woman deliver 41 axe blows and claim self-defense? The answer to that question, and how Candy Montgomery ultimately walked free, would soon unfold in a courtroom drama that turned this suburban crime into national headlines. How did Candy manage to get away with murder? The twists in this case had only begun to surface. Watch out for part 2. Kindly subscribe to get more true crime stories.